Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Kestis from Jedi Survivor. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. Over the Christmas break, I had a bit of extra time, so I was able to really dive in and play a lot of Star Wars video games. And in keeping in the gaming greats mood, it inspired me to go through my archive of still carded vintage collection figures and pull out some gaming greats figures to open to add to my loose action figure collection. Now, the most recent wave of vintage collection figures that actually arrived here in New Zealand in late December included the very cool Jetpack Trooper from Jedi Survivor, VC265, and I opened that one up straight away. So now that I have a cool villain from Jedi Survivor, I have to open up the hero himself, Kestis. I've kept this one on his backing card for a while because I wanted a few other Jedi Survivor figures to sort of add to a display, but I really want to open him up and celebrate some really cool Star Wars video games in my action figure collection. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll get Kestis out of the packaging. We can take a look at all of his cool details and accessories, but first let's take a quick look at the backing card. The packaging for the Vintage Collection line of 3.75-inch figures is heavily inspired by the original vintage Kenner Star Wars action figure packaging style from the 1970s and 80s. They both have the Star Wars logo at the top and of course that iconic chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art on the right. When I compare this modern Kestis figure with a slightly older gaming greats carded figure, you can really see the change in the packaging design style, and I have to say I much prefer this modern version. Hasbro used to put gaming greats figures on a Star Wars A New Hope style backing card, which even included the iconic Luke and Leia artwork here in the top right hand side, and they put the video game logo down here below the character art just above the Kenner logo. Nowadays they put the entertainment title up here with the Star Wars logo, which matches all of the other backing card styles. I much prefer this one. This version of Kestis is from the second in the Jedi game series, Jedi Survivor. We have that game logo there at the top in red. And for Kestis, we have a green accent color seen here for the title plate with a black font, and of course the accent color in behind the character here as well. Now, when it comes to video games and gaming greats figures, we usually get some really cool packaging art here because they can give us some really high definition promotional imagery here rather than like a screenshot from the game. So we've got a really nice card art here of Kestis. He's got his lightsaber in behind the bubble. It's a little bit hidden, but we can see the blade up the top. And of course, very importantly, we can also see BD1 posed here on his back. Very cute. I just like the amount of costume detail we can see very clearly there because I like it when I can see the costume details replicated here on the figure. I just like to see those two match well. The figure itself, we've got a lot of accessories. We have both a lit lightsaber and an unlit hilt. If you look closely, you can see that we actually have an attachment peg on the unlit hilt, which is missing from the bladed weapon, which I like. I don't like trying to pose a bladed weapon in their hands with that peg getting in the way. But of course, it's very important for attaching to the hilt. So I really like the fact we've got both versions included here. We also have a blaster pistol and of course, his cute little droid BD1 there as well. Really nice packaging there. Moving on to the back of the backing card now, you can see this is a slightly older figure, VC265, and of course because it's slightly older we also have the older backing card style here, which was a little more closely inspired to the original Kenner backing cards, where we have preview images of other figures released around the same time and the double chrome racetrack with Star Wars logo, very Kenner inspired. Of course, if you compare it to more modern figures, this one is VC336, they have changed up the backing card style to feature the front of the backing card, a picture of the figure and a bit of a character blurb there with the accent color. I do think this one is pretty cool, much more of a vintage collection tie-in to the original Kenner figures, but unlike the original vintage figures, we do have a lot of modern copyright, which unfortunately takes up a lot of the backing card. But either way, very cool packaging for Kestis. I really like that high resolution promotional image there, matching quite nicely to the figure itself. But of course, I do want to add him to my loose figure display, so let's open him up. So now I have the Kestis figure and all of his accessories out of the packaging so we can take a closer look. So of course, as usual, I'm going to start with the face, and I really like the sculpting here. And of course, we've got the modern digital printing, which is really in particular helpful for characters with a bit of a facial hair. In the past, if they were trying to sort of paint a beard, it was too strong. It was very sort of a harsh contrast. I really like the digital printing here. It's just perfect for a stubble and facial hair and sort of short beards like we have on Cal here. So I really like that. Nice tidy painting on the eyes and those strong eyebrows, and a really tidy line for the hair there as well. It is not a separate piece. It is sculpted as part of the head, so we don't have sort of a plastic join line around the hair, and the paint is actually really closely aligned to the sculpting line, which I really like to see. Now I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something about the hair that is kind of reminding me of Lego minifigure hair, and I think it's because it looks a little smooth and it's so uniform in color. It's kind of a little bit sort of clicked on, even though I know it's part of the hair. And normally that sharp, clean hairline would be absolutely fantastic, but because the hair doesn't have too much texture or variation in color tone, it's just looking just a little bit plastic, more so from the back, but from the front I can't really fault it really. It's just so tidy. I really like that. So moving down, we have Cal's outfit from Jedi Survivor here. It's kind of interesting because we don't often see bare arms or particular bare forearms in Star Wars characters that much. So it's kind of almost interesting to see actually a bare sort of a skin forearm here going all the way up to the elbow. That's quite unusual when it comes to vintage collection figures. A lot of Star Wars characters tend to be all the way covered up with just the hands exposed. So that's really fun as a variation. Something I was a little bit curious about with Cal Kestis in his packaging, there is no attachment point on the back of the figure to mount BD1 as he is seen on the backing card art. He often sits kind of on the shoulder here, but there's really no sort of way to mount the figure on Cal unless you kind of play around with blue tack or perhaps even glue. I'm gonna give it a shot, but I don't think there's any real way to kind of mount him on there. I might be able to sort of lean his little droid chin there, but I don't think it's really going to be like that. I think he's going to be just standing next to him. So that was just an interesting point because you couldn't see the figure while it was in his bubble there. But there's some really nice details, and from first glance everything looks painted just as well as the face there. We've got a sort of a brown leather strap crossing across the body. We've got a little bit of a buckle detail here under the left arm. It travels all the way around to the back. I don't see any paint to accentuate the sort of strap details here. It is all just straight brown. We've got a little bit of a sort of an orange shoulder pad here on the right shoulder. And we have a sort of a metallic silver wrist cuff on his right arm there. Moving down, it looks like the blue vest has some sort of dark gray or black areas of detail work here and down here as well, but nothing else on the back. It is all pretty much that blue color, dark blue color, really nice. He does have a sort of a hip belt here just across here with a bit of painted detail. It does look like we've even got a silver buckle that's a little bit hidden under his vest there. That's quite nice. I like it when the details underneath are still painted. They're not, you know, completely sort of abandoned. We've got some food capsules here in a metallic color there, and we also have a holster. Now it looks like the holster is actually formed as part of the belt here, but once it gets down to the leg, it is not actually formed as part of it. You can see that this is slightly rubbery, and I can actually pull it away from the leg, so that's kind of fun. Often if it is sort of crafted as part of the thigh, it means that we're going to have a lot of limited movement, but because this is done in a sort of a rubbery plastic, you can see I can flex open the holster here, and this part can actually move up and down the leg. That means that it shouldn't get too much in the way of some poses, because we have got a lot of articulation points in the leg like we expect from vintage collection. The belt itself is mostly just two colors. We've got this darker green color here for the holster, moving into a bit more of a light gray, and if I move his arm out of the way, you can see that we have a peg attachment point to put that lightsaber hilt in there as well, which I really quite like. Of course, when it comes to lightsaber users in action figure form, I much prefer the way that they have actually included the accessories here. One lit blade with no peg to get in the way of their handed grip, and a unlit hilt with a peg so that you can pose it on their belt, because of course he also does have a blaster pistol, so perhaps you don't always want to have him with his lit lightsaber. Sometimes you want for him to use a blaster pistol there as well. Now, in terms of a blaster pistol grip, he does actually have sort of a bit more of a reversed grip. I'm jumping around here a little bit because I'm just curious. Now, he does actually have a classic lightsaber grip, more of that sort of C-shaped grip on his right hand. And usually, if characters have an extended separate trigger finger, it's usually on their right hand, with most figures kind of being more of a blaster hand dominant on their right. But I guess because he's going to be holding his lightsaber more dominantly in his right hand, he's got an extended trigger finger on his left hand. So I'm kind of hoping we'll do some cool poses with a blaster pistol in this hand and a lightsaber in this hand. So it's quite interesting. It's not often I see the extended trigger finger on on one hand, but not the right hand. It's kind of interesting there. So of course, moving down at the figure, we've got fairly plain sort of cargo style pants with lots of pockets. We can see the sculpting detail of the pocket even extends underneath the holster here. We can see that pocket detail a little bit more clearer here on the right leg. Moving down to, he's kind of got sort of boot spats covering his lower legs there, and boots there. Lots of little details, but no painting to accentuate anything. We haven't got any sort of buckle or strap or separate paint jobs there. Just a slight, very, very slight difference. Got a little bit of fluff there. A little bit of a plastic difference here. I can't tell if it's just the sheen, but it looks like, I think maybe we've got one of these instances where this is made out of a certain color plastic, and then this part is painted to match, because there's something about this one that just looks a little bit shinier compared to this part of the pants. So I think perhaps the lower half of the boots, particularly when we look at those articulation points, the lower half of the legs is actually this boot spat color, and then the knees and the articulation point are painted to match here. So just a very subtle difference in color, particularly under strong lighting. This just looks just a little bit shinier than that, but overall a pretty good match. It didn't immediately grab my eyes. I'm just looking at things very, very close up. So overall, really nice and tidy in terms of the paint job. We've even got a little bit of a silver detail here on his left sleeve there. Everything looks really tidy. The one thing that I thought caught my eye is we've got this sort of little insert here of his t-shirt and sort of the v-neck crossover of his vest here, and there is just a tiny bit of a dot where it looks like the paint hasn't quite completely filled in and covered the darker color underneath. There is just a little bit of a dot where it's actually just a tiny bit of missing paint, where they've painted in sort of the white shirt sort of section there, and it hasn't completely covered it there, but that is just an absolute tiny, tiny dot. Everything else looks really tidy. Really, really nice. Even the belt and everything like that. He looks pretty cool. No bright colors, no sort of complicated sort of patterns or anything like that, but just a nice tidy figure that feels quite a pretty good representation of his appearance in the video game. So nice sculpting detail. Of course, there's not sort of big bulky armor, so I'm hoping and expecting him to have quite good articulation, particularly because he's got sort of a slim fit outfit. He hasn't got armor in the way. Of course, in saying that, we do have this sort of interesting hip holster here. Interesting in the fact that it's actually on his left leg. A lot of characters often wear holsters on their right, so it's kind of interesting to have everything sort of swapped around, like the blaster pistol finger here as well. So let's dive in. I just want to quickly tip him back a little bit to see if I can check out the paint on that belt there. That is really nice. His vest doesn't feel like it's actually made out of that sort of a rubbery plastic, so he doesn't kind of bend back, and it's actually quite a bit of resistance to pull up this edge of his vest there to show that silver buckle. I just quite like the fact sometimes when things overlap, Hasbro can kind of skip over the painting details, but I like that he still has that very recognizable silver belt buckle underneath there, even though it is for the most part covered by the way his vest sits there. Kind of interesting. I thought I would be able to tip his torso back a little bit, we don't have a mid-torso articulation point. Sometimes on some sort of fabric dressed characters, they have to put the articulation point just straight through the middle or something like that, so we can sort of tip the character backwards and forwards. This one, he does tip at the waist. I'm kind of jumping here a bit ahead so you can kind of see the belt buckle and sort of tipping there, but he doesn't really have much of a front and back movement there because this vest is made out of a hard plastic. It's not rubber, so it is really completely sort of hitting here in the back and at the front. So he's not got really that much in the way of sort of a torso flex backwards and forwards. We can do that at his hips, but he's not really doing that at the waist, but I can turn him. He's got a little bit of a creak to him because we are hitting the plastic. You can kind of see him just pulling it a little bit to get him to turn all the way around there, but he does turn. He's not flicking back to center or anything like that. So kind of interesting there. Some of my other sort of figures have a bit more of a articulation through the midsection there, and he doesn't. So let's test out his head. As expected, he doesn't have any sort of hairstyle that is catching on the back. He can turn his head very easily. We've got a fair bit front and back. It's usually a little bit more limited. Nice and easy side to side. Now, of course, because he is wearing a different colored shirt underneath a vest, I often remark that when Hasbro sort of makes characters that wear jackets, sometimes you can really see the difference in the sleeves and sort of the vest section of a jacket. It kind of looks different, but in this figure, it is different. So of course, it doesn't really matter, but I do like the way it looks like the sleeves are running in underneath the vest there. That's quite nice. You want it to look like separate pieces. And I can see just sort of peeking in there, I can kind of see the articulation points in there, and I'm hoping that even though this little shoulder detail does extend a little bit over the top of that, it's not going to stop us from getting some good articulation because he's got quite a few accessories, and I want to be able to get him into some good poses. So his arms can go completely up to the side, and of course if we rotate them as well, a little bit limited on that right in terms of going straight up. You can see just a slight difference in angle there just because that is sort of cutting in on that right shoulder there. Not too much though. Could still get pretty high on that one, so quite good. Of course, they swing around quite nicely, and we've got some good elbow articulation. I kind of like it when they're just a little bit bent because now we can kind of move, as it were, the articulation sort of joint visibility to the back, where it hides a little bit better just because on the front, there's nowhere to hide when it's skin and it's always visible. The lighter toned colors, it just shows up. When we have black arms here, the details hide a lot better in those darker colors. But of course, that looks pretty good there. And again, we've got exposed wrists. Now, we've got quite an exposed articulation here on the side of the hand because we don't have gloves or armor or anything kind of hiding on to hide it. So on this particular hand, he's got more of a side-to-side rocker here. You can kind of see that. He's going to be tipping his hand side to side. Of course, vintage collection does tend to have tiny little joints, particularly in the wrists, so I'm not going to try and sort of stress out the movement. I do get a little bit of movement, and it is holding in position. It's not just kind of doing that little wiggle backwards and forwards. I can actually get it into position. It's not giving me a huge amount. Of course, I'm able to rotate the hands like I want to be able to. That's the main thing for me, making sure I've got a nice rotation there in the hand. And you can see this one also has a side-to-side rocker as well. That is a little bit more limited because we've got a bit more of a bracer here, which is just limiting the hands a little bit. And again, it's such a small articulation point. I always do feel a little bit nervous. I always don't want to break a wrist. But yeah, it does hold its position there. And so we tested out the waist. Let's test out the legs. So I'm curious to see how much this is going to limit because we've got that sort of rubbery holster there, but we can see the articulation style for his legs there. Good flexibility. We can go not quite full splits, but pretty wide there, which is going to be fun. And of course, we can go around to the front. We are hitting that second belt. When I get to about there, that's about where that leg wants to go. And I can go pretty well to the back once I kind of get to articulation in the right orientation. And of course, we've also got that mid thigh swivel point there as well, and because it is lined up with the top of that pocket, it's not cutting through sculpted detail, which is my favorite way. I know that that's not something Hasbro can help. If there's costume detail there, they're going to have to cut through it, but I like it when it works in with the sculpting detail. So now we've got the holster on this leg. I'm not sure how well we're going to be able to raise this leg without that holster kind of providing a little bit of resistance. I can actually move the leg up quite high, but the rubber of that holster kind of wants to spring it back down to about there. So that's about where it naturally sort of wants to sit. Of course, if you're going to pull this holster around a little bit, the sculpting on his thighs means that I can't really push this up higher to kind of pull it up and give us a little bit more slack to move the leg around with this one. I can pull it down a little bit. But yeah, and of course we can get a little bit of rotation underneath the holster. You can see that there. It's limiting my ability to sort of move things quite as easily and fluidly as this leg, but the articulation is there, just a little bit of a limitation when it comes to this holster. But I do like having these holsters being separate. Of course we do get a little bit of limitation, but it's nice that it's there and not fully sculpted onto the leg, because that would completely do away with these articulation points. So it's a good mix there. I quite like that. The knees, these are definitely looking more painted now that I can sort of see them. The paint just gives a little bit more resistance to the hinges, and you can kind of see a little bit of the difference there. This inner section there is from the colored plastic of the thighs, and the outer sections are the painted sections from the lower half there. Pretty good paint match, but when you can kind of see them close up, you can see the difference in the sheen and just that really subtle color difference. But we can bend them all the way back to about there before we sort of hit resistance there. That's pretty good. They've got pretty good stiffness. They're not flimsy, and I can get a pretty good movement. I can also rotate them, of course. Lots of good posing there, and kind of stiff on the ankles, but I can get a good point there. I guess I do actually prefer kind of stiff ankles. If they're a little bit loose, then they do tend to sort of contribute to a little bit of a domino effect with figures slowly falling over time. But of course, in these smaller articulation joints, I don't want to feel like I'm potentially breaking something. Now, looking at the underside here, he has very shallow attachment posts there in terms of putting this guy on a stand. That's got to be some of the most shallow I have ever seen a peg hole on a figure. He is not really going to be standing on much there. He is going to need blue tack, or dare I say it, glue, to attach him onto a clear stand or a stand of any kind. That is just almost non-existent. It's so short that's not really going to do anything, which is a shame, because personally I do like to put my 3.75 inch figures on clear stands, but that's not really going to work. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with him. I don't trust my figures to completely stand up on their own. Very interesting. Okay, so pretty good articulation. Of course, we've got a little bit of limitation from the holster, but I do like the style of it. So let's check out his accessories so we can do just a little bit of posing, see how he holds everything. I'm going to actually start off with his lightsaber hilt. So you can see that we have a nice clear attachment peg that should fit in nicely to the hole on his belt there. But when I was getting this out of the packaging, I thought I saw something that was kind of interesting, and I wanted to take a closer look. Now, I thought when I put them on the desk, I kind of put them together, and I thought, oh, the lights casting from this blue plastic sort of reflecting on the silver of this one. But when I took a closer look, it's going to be really hard to show if the camera will focus on it, but I believe this hilt is actually made from the same translucent blue plastic as this one. We all know that, of course, when they're lit full hilts, they're all made out of the translucent blue plastic, and then the hilts are just painted over the top. So if you were to sort of snap this one in half or scrape off the paint, you would see the blue underneath. What I was not expecting was that the unlit hilts to be made from that same blue plastic. Now, most of the time, the unlit hilts on most character lightsabers have a completely flat emitter, so it's painted over. You never see into it, but because of these sort of extended emitter shrouds, I can actually see into the emitter, and I can see the unpainted plastic on the inside, which is translucent blue. It's probably really hard to show on camera because it's such a small aspect of the detail, but it is honestly blue, and I thought that that was really fun. In terms of the actual lightsaber, we've got some fantastic tiny detail, particularly on the grip here. This little darker metallic textured section, fantastic fine detail that I can feel when I run my fingernail over it, and I just really like the overall paint there. Now, of course, this one's going to look pretty odd if we put it in his hand because we've got these sort of extended points here, and this is going to get in the way of his hand or extend beneath it. It is generally intended just to mount on his belt here. So sometimes the pegs, because they are painted, just that extra layer of paint makes them a very tight fit. And one of my sort of main paranoias with this type of accessory is the potential of snapping off this peg and having it permanently lodged in the belt. So I'm hoping that it's a good fit, but not too tight and not a fight. So that is a nice fit. So it's not going all the way in, but I was able to push that in, not too much of a fight. I hope you can see that blue. It's almost glowing in the end of his lightsaber. That's quite fun. But you can see we've got just a little bit of a gap there because that post is actually fairly long, which is quite nice, but it does sit on his hip there nicely. And that wasn't a fight to get that in. I can pull that out and I don't feel like I'm at risk of snapping that off, even though it doesn't go all the way in. Nice fit. I'm really happy with that. Okay. Let's go in with his blaster pistol next. So this one, I don't know if you can see it on camera. I hope it's reading. It looks very soft with its detail, especially compared to this fantastic lightsaber. There's just a lot of fine detail to this lightsaber hilt, and then there's something about this blaster pistol. It might just be the color or the fact that the barrel doesn't have that much detail, but the overall effect is just giving less detail or softer detail. We have a sort of a mid-gray plastic with a small amount of brown paint here for the grip. We do have an enclosed trigger guard. It's quite long, quite a different style for a Star Wars blaster pistol. But yeah, it's just reading a little bit softer to sort of my eyes. But because he has the extended trigger finger, I'm going to go ahead and put it in his left hand to start. Now that grip is quite slender, so it does actually fit into his hand quite nicely. And that was very easy to hook his extended trigger finger into the trigger guard. So that was nice and easy. It does kind of sit naturally just in front of his finger, but if I sort of push it towards the back, I can get his finger hooked in there quite easily. Hopefully you can see the way that his finger is hooking through that. So you can sort of see, to get his finger all the way through, I'm kind of turning the blaster at a slightly awkward angle. If I'm putting that in his hand kind of lined up, his finger is just kind of resting there. It looks quite nice. That went into his hand quite easily. If I'm going to put it into his other hand, it's a little bit tighter actually. I have to really push it to get into that. And because he doesn't have an extended trigger finger, it's going to sit above his hand because I can't get that trigger guard down any lower. So definitely looks better in his left hand there. But let's test it out in his holster. So we do have this kind of open top here, and the bottom does have a hole. Hopefully you can see it there. So we do get light going all the way through. And I think we might even get some of the emitter down the bottom here as well. So let's see. Yep, we do. It goes all the way through. So we get to the tip extending down below the bottom there. Fits in really nicely. I can push it all the way down to there. That's actually quite deep, but we've got a nice amount of that blaster pistol grip there, so I can pull that out. That's a nice grip. It's not stuck in there. I can slide that in and out freely, so that's quite nice. Okay. 2 out of the 4 accessories down. Let's take a look at his lit lightsaber. Of course, if a character uses a lightsaber, this is pretty much going to be my favorite accessory. But of course, in Kestis' case, we also have the very cute BD, who I am leaving till last. But I do want to check out this lightsaber. So you can see we don't have an attachment peg on this one. Of course, it wouldn't make sense to put a lit lightsaber on your belt. And we can see that because we've got those painted silver emitters, we can see the blue blade traveling up in between them. You cannot remove this lightsaber from this blade. It is permanently attached, so no worries about potentially snapping off a very tiny little attachment peg. On my one, there is just the tiniest amount of silver paint that is just spilled over. You can kind of see just a very small point that is kind of blocking the light from going all the way through the lightsaber. It's just cutting in there. very, very small, and you can kind of see the light blocking when I rotate it to the other side, just that very tiny little sort of mark there. But overall, really, really nice. We've got this really nice texture here. I'm a particular fan of Kestis's lightsaber. I love it. I actually bought the limited run sort of deluxe version of Jedi Survivor, which came with a full-size replica of his lightsaber. I love it to bits, so it's kind of fun seeing it in tiny action figure form. It's such a really cool lightsaber design, and I love having it in couple of different versions. Now I have it in Black Series Vintage Collection and a full-size replica. So let's go ahead and test this one out in his right hand grip. Now, this was a little bit tight on his blaster pistol, but that's because it's designed to fit his lightsaber, and that was a really nice fit. His lightsaber is nice and slender. He doesn't have any sort of emitters or large boxes or anything like that is really getting in the way, and because this sort of emitter shroud is just a little bit wider than the bulk of the lightsaber, kind of finds a nice natural resting spot there, and he holds it really well. It's just nice. It's not really fighting me, and I can slide it around. There's nothing really in there. Some lightsabers, they look really cool, and then you go and try and put them in action figure hands. I'm looking at you. Those circular Inquisitor lightsabers, they are quite tricky to get in just the right spot in action figure hands. So Kestis is looking cool with all of his accessories. Now, of course, now that I've gone and tested out his legs, let's see how well he stands up. And he's actually pretty good. I didn't even really tweak his feet or anything to really stand up. He's nice and steady, even with a lightsaber extended in front of him, which is quite good considering those peg holes in the bottom of his feet are very, very shallow. I do kind of wish that some of the details on his legs perhaps had a little bit more of a paint to sort of bring them a little bit more into the foreground. I can see some fun sort of buckle details on his boots and his spats that don't have any paint. But yeah, sometimes even if they're like a shade or two darker or lighter, it's, I guess, not worth the time and extra money for Hasbro to kind of add those extra paint details there. But overall, he's looking really cool. But of course, he wouldn't be complete without his adorable little droid BD1. So BD has tiny feet, and I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to sort of stand up while I checked out Kestis, so I just had him lying down in the back. So as you can see, we've got a very unique shaped droid. I do like the fact that we've got a BD droid in The Mandalorian, of course, with Palimoto on Tatooine. I love that kind of little nod. So we've got articulated legs sort of at the main body, and the head is articulated. The antenna are not, so they are flexible, so hopefully they will withstand a little bit of pressure should you keep yours in amongst other things. They shouldn't snap off because they do have a bit of a flex, but I have to say I'm quite impressed with some of the really fine detail. I hope you can see this kind of little grill section. I don't even know if the camera can focus on it, it's so tiny. It's got this really fine detail of a little sort of grill section here in the back that is just really well painted, really, really nice. And of course we've got metallic sections here across the top. We've got his little eye and details across the front. We've got red and silver paint, and we've also got red details and down his legs there. Some really lovely detail. Now, he does not have peg holes on the underside of his feet. Too small and too shallow. You can see the actual depth there of his feet. There's just no way he would actually sit on pegs. They would go all the way through. And looking closely, his sort of knees are not articulated, neither are his ankles. So we just have the head, and then if I can sort of hold his body still, we can articulate his legs just in that one motion. Of course, they're quite free. We can go all the way around or completely off. You can see they are just a peg there. Kind of flexed him a little bit too much there. But yeah, I do like the fact that his head is a little bit more of a ball joint, so we can get just the cute sort of side to side. We can turn him around, up and down. Of course, lots of cute expressions there, but I said I'd try and test him out on his shoulders, but yeah, looking at it in person, there's just no way that's going to work. I can't hook him on anyway. There's just no way that's going to work. It would kind of go a little bit like this. I thought maybe there would be like a peg or something like that, or perhaps they could have given us like a separate version of this that could peg on. Hasbro just doesn't use magnets anymore, because that would have been really cute. But I guess if you're brave, you could put a little bit of glue or perhaps something like blue tack to kind of try and connect him onto Kestis's back, but that's about as good as I can get just simply holding him there. Just taking a minute or two, BD1 is a little bit precarious in terms of actually standing him up. There's just not too many ways that I can get him to balance, and he's just very small and very light. He does tend to just sort of tip over a little bit. So because I can't put him on a peg and he doesn't attach directly to Cal, I might have to just do something like a little bit of blue tack, or just live with the fact that I'm always going to be keeping an eye on him to make sure he hasn't tipped over, because he's just a little bit prone to tipping over. But I'm just so glad that Hasbro did include him with Cal. I don't think it would seem like a proper complete figure without him. I'm really happy to have him. He is so tiny and cute. But there you go. That was Cal Kestis and BD1 from Jedi Survivor. Kind of interesting that even though this is a named droid, he is not named or mentioned on the backing card. It is simply labeled as Cal Kestis, not with BD1. But I do like the fact that he is included. Very cute. I love the painting detail on this one especially. Really happy to see how well the accessories work for Cal Kestis. Lots of posability, different action poses. He's got pretty good articulation. Really, really happy with this one, especially when it comes to Force users and video game characters. A lot of the Force fights and lightsaber fights in video games are more dramatic than what we often see in live action. Of course, video game characters can do immense sort of Force tricks and jumps around and stuff like that. So I really do like the fact that I'm gonna have some real fun posing this one with some lightsaber action there. And of course, I also have a couple of other Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor sort of bad guys for Cal Kestis to pose against. So I'm going to have a lot of fun taking some photos of this one as I work through some of the posing options before I find the definitive pose that I want to have him in when I add him to my action figure collection. But really happy to have Cal Kestis in his Jedi Survivor look for my Gaming Greats lineup of Star Wars Vintage Collection figures. He's really cool. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars action figure and had a lot of fun checking out all of the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently opened up the Jetpack Trooper figure VC365. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.